Middleware is a function called before the route handler. It has access to the requests and response objects and the next middleware function. Let's say a client does an HTTP request to some route handler. The middleware puts itself before the route handler. As I said, it has access to the request and the response objects and the next function, which is used to send the request to the next destination, in this case the route handler. Middleware is used in functions or in classes as providers. Let's go to the code. The first thing I want to show you is in the docs controller. As you know, NestJs is built on top of Express.js. You don't need to copy what I'm going to do, just watch. If I went here to the post, for example, and I did @request, which is another decorator we haven't talked about, this gets the express request, which is of type request from express. We import it from express, right here. What does this mean? This means if I log it, I get all the requests. Let's test this. If I do a post, I'm getting all the requests in the console. I can do rec.body and I would only get the body, which is here. Let's now do this, but using a middleware instead of writing right here. I'm going to remove what I've done. Let's create a middleware. The middleware will be located in the source folder. So create a folder called middleware, and inside I'm going to create a file called logger.middleware.ts. The first middleware we are going to create is function based. I'm going to create a function called logger middleware. This function will have three parameters, which is the request, the response, and the next, all from Express. We need to type annotate them. The request comes from request, and you need to import it from Express. So the response and the next, that it's called next function. We now have access to the request, the response, and the next function from Express.js. We can now do whatever we want, which is in this case just a console log. Let me then log the request.body. And don't forget to add the next function. And there we go. We created our first middleware. But how do we use it now? To use it, you need to go to the docs module or wherever module you want to import it in. And right inside the docs module, we need to create a configure or config, wherever you want to name, function. This configure function will take a consumer, which we will need to import it, and I think it's middleware consumer. Yes, middleware consumer. And inside, you do wherever you want with the consumer. In this case, we are going to apply our middleware, which we named it logger middleware. Now we have the logger middleware applied, but we are not specifying which routes in this controller is going to be applied to. So for that, you write for routes, and here you say wherever route you want. For now, let's say all routes, so docs controller. Now let's test this. I'm going to comment this route of the user because we are not going to use it anymore, and I'm going to do a get docs. As you can see in the console, we got an empty object because the get doesn't send a body at all. The get by ID, we also get an empty object, but the post and the patch, we don't. We get the body. Now you might think, why am I getting the body of a get or a delete if I'm not sending a body at all? How do I specify the routes I want? There's two ways to do this. In the for routes, instead of saying docs controller, you can say the routes you want, or before the for routes, you can use the .exclude, and inside you say which routes of that controller are going to be excluded. The first thing you need to pass is the path, which in this case is docs. And the next thing you need to pass is the method, where I advise you to import the request method from NestJs common, and here you have all the methods. In this case is get. And we now excluded the get docs, which is this one. If I send a request, you can see we don't get an object anymore. To add more paths, you separate them with a comma. I'm going to copy the one we already have, and the only difference is that now it's docs by ID, and the other one is also docs by ID, but it's not a get, it's a delete. We excluded these three methods. You can see now that if I do a post or a patch, I'm getting the body, but if I do a delete, a get by ID, or a get, I didn't get a body. We now learned how to create a middleware using functions. Let's now learn how to create middleware using classes. For that, let's create a new file and call it roles.middleware roles.ts. Let's export the class. I'm going to call it roles middleware, and this class implements the Nest middleware. What does implement mean? Implement means it needs to follow an interface. If you control or command click on the Nest middleware, you can see the interface is right here. So let's copy it and use it inside. Now, just like the function-based middleware, we need to import things from Express, which is the request, the response, and you can delete this, next function. Open, and inside here is where we write the logic. We could do the same thing, for example, just log the request. But let's do something with a bit more logic. Let's say a user can only access a route if he sends the word admin in an authorization header. So for that, we need to get the authorization header. Const auth header, my bad, and header comes from request.headers.authorization. Now we have access to the authorization header. Let's create some logic. If the person doesn't send an authorization header, or if the authorization header is different than admin, then we are going to send some type of error message. Let's do this the express way, which is with response.status, and here you say the status, and then you use .send to send a message, which is unauthorized, and use the next middleware function in case of success. The last thing we need to do is to mark this as a provider so we can use it. Now, how do we use this middleware? We use it the exact same way we use the other one. We come to the module we want, and we can separate by commas and use more than one middleware. So right now we are using two middlewares. And now let's try the posts. I got unauthorized, but I also got an error. Oh, I forgot to add return here. If I do a post, I get unauthorized and no error at all. Now let's try with an authorization of admin. You can see it worked. If I say any other thing, like I'm a user, I am unauthorized. And that's it. Let's comment the roles middleware because NestJs has a better way to do this, but we are going to learn this in future episodes.